In October 1415, about 6,000 Englishmen stood in a muddy field in northern France, staring at a French army several times their size. The English were sick. They were starving. Most of them had dysentery. And by the end of that day, the French dead would be piled higher than a man. And most of them would not be killed by a sword or an arrow. They'd be killed by the mud and by each other. Stick around, because that part is the whole story. I'm Kranky. This is Agincourt. It started badly for England. Henry V had sailed to France to press his claim to the throne, and the first thing he did was get bogged down besieging a town called Harfleur. It took 5 weeks. By the time it fell, disease had gutted his army and winter was coming. So Henry did the sensible thing. He decided to march to the English-held port of Calais, get on a boat, and go home. But the French were not going to let him just leave. They shadowed his exhausted column, blocked the river crossings, and forced him to march further and further out of his way, cold, hungry, and melting away from sickness. After about 2.5 weeks, the English were trapped. A huge French army planted itself directly across the road to Calais, near a castle called Agincourt. There was no way around it. Henry's tired, sick little army was going to have to fight a much larger, fresh army. The French were so confident that the night before, they reportedly argued over which English nobles they'd capture and ransom. On paper, it wasn't a battle, it was an execution. But here's what the French forgot: the ground. The battlefield was a narrow strip of freshly plowed farmland, boxed in by thick woods on both sides. It had been raining for days. The field was a swamp, and it pinched in toward the English like a funnel. That funnel is everything. The French had the numbers, but the woods meant they could only attack along a front a few hundred yards wide. All those extra thousands of men had nowhere to go. They just stacked up behind the front rank. Henry put his small force of armored men in the center, and on the wings, he placed a real weapon. Thousands of longbowmen crouched behind a hedge of sharpened wood stakes. Sharpened wood stakes hammered into the mud. For hours, nobody moved. Neither side wanted to attack across that mud, so Henry gambled. He marched his whole army forward to longbow range and had the archers rip up their stakes and hammer them back in, right in the enemy's face. Then the arrows came. An English longbow could loose 10, 12 arrows a minute, and there were thousands of archers. The sky went dark. Now, at long range, those arrows often could not punch through the good plate armor, but they didn't have to. They maddened the horses. They forced the knights to duck their heads and slam their visors shut. And they goaded the French into attacking. The French cavalry charged, hit the stakes in the arrow storm, and recoiled straight back into their own advancing infantry. And then the main French line, thousands of armored men on foot, began to slog forward into the funnel through knee-deep mud. What happens next wasn't really a battle. It was a traffic jam with knives. The French knights, in 50 or 60 pounds of armor, sank into the mud with every step. The funnel squeezed them tighter and tighter. The ranks behind kept shoving forward, so the men at the front couldn't move, couldn't swing, couldn't even fall over without being trampled. Some of them suffocated on their feet. When a knight went down, he often simply drowned in the mud, pinned under the bodies that fell on top of him. And then the English archers, out of arrows, dropped their bows, snatched up mallets, hatchets, and daggers, and waded in. Light on their feet on the soft ground, they butchered the trapped, exhausted, half-drowned French where they stood. Cause of death? Not the longbow. The longbow only opened the door. The mud and the crush did the killing. The French weren't beaten by a better army, they were beaten by their own numbers, funneled into a swamp where being big and armored and many was a death sentence. By the end, the French had lost thousands, including a huge slice of their nobility. Henry lost a few hundred. It is one of the most lopsided victories in all of history. Before you go, 3 quick things to ruin a dinner party with. 1. Partway through the battle, Henry ordered his men to kill their French prisoners, a brutal call he made when he feared a fresh attack on his rear. It unsettled even his own soldiers. 2. It was fought on St. Crispin's Day. In the famous speech, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers," wasn't said by Henry. Shakespeare wrote it almost 200 years later. 3. You've heard that English archers waved 2 fingers at the French to brag that they still had their bow fingers? Great story. There's basically no evidence it ever happened. This was Kranky Battles, where every war is badly drawn. Subscribe before the mud gets you too.